אני מתנצלת, אני הכנתי את ההרצאה באנגלית, אולי בגלל שגם האנגלית, גם העברית לא שפתים שלי, ומאוד קשה לי לרוץ בין צרפתית לאנגלית לעברית, והעברית יש לה דינמיקה מאוד אחרת מהאנגלית, ואני קוראת את כמובן פה באנגלית. אפשר לסגור את הדלת. אבל אני קוראת איתי, וזה יהיה קל. The scholarship about the fall of the House of Usher is vast and fascinating. Still, reading a few articles, I was disappointed. I was surprised to see that most discussions relate to the plot. I first read this story when I was a teenager, and I found it to be one of the most beautiful pieces I ever encountered. Before reading scholarly analysis, it did not occur to me that the plot had such great significance. I viewed this writing then, as I do today, to be a poem in prose. The slow-moving long sentences are not complicated Gothic structures, as many analysts try to claim. They are poetic stanzas, and many parts of the text reads naturally as a poem. It is only that the reader has to be sensitive to the text's inner rhythm. I read now a sentence without changing anything, only breaking it down according to its poetic rhythm. This comes from the beginning of the book. I looked upon the scene before me, upon the mere house, and the simple landscape features of the domain, upon the bleak walls, upon the vacant eye-like windows, upon a few rank sedges, and upon a few white trunks of decayed trees, with an utter depression of soul, which I can compare to no earthly sensation more properly than to the after-dream of the reveler upon opium, the bitter lapse into everyday life, the hideous dropping of the whale. And this is obviously a poem. The Fall of the House of Usher is a poem in prose, elaborating on one central poetic theme, the castle. Many analysts have discussed how the disintegrating castle in this story symbolizes the state of mind and the fate of the protagonists of the plot. Here I am continuing what David already partly said. I want to say something different. In my reading, the castle is not a literary device in order to reflect the mental state and fate of the protagonists. It is the other way around. The plot is the scenery that enhances the poetic theme. I don't consider the castle to be a metaphor at all. In fact, I do not consider the castle to be a castle. In the human psyche, the castle is part of a complex of dream spaces. The castle, the forest, the jungle, the desert, the cave, the tunnel, and the catacomb. These are not sceneries for romantic fairy tales. They are imaginary terrains in humankind's subconscious. They are deeply rooted in our dreams, reveries, and fantasies, so deep that they might be the repository of primeval memory. They are part of what Young calls the collective subconscious. The castle is merely a domesticated version of the forest-jungle-cave complex. And in those countries where there are castles, its resonance for the imagination is similar. When in the following I will use any of these words, castle, forest, or cave, I will mean less the concrete place than the totality of this image complex in the dreaming mind. The castle of our imagination is always old, like the forest and the cave are old. They connect us to an ancient time which we feel to belong to, but which we cannot recapture. It is the elusive time of all beginning. These spaces were lived before us, but we don't know the generations that lived here. And even if we have some inkling about them, we do not understand them. And yet something about them still hovers in the air. They were once here, and not for a moment can we forget that. The castle and the forest are filled with spirits of the dead, of souls burdened with their secrets, and these secrets too will remain eternally inseparable for us. I cannot keep myself from adding that there is a tribe called Karuli in Papua New Guinea who imagines all the world of the music and the world of the souls as the sounds of the forest. The castle forest cave is a space where the souls and spirits larger than life dwell and have the power to act upon our lives. It is a space of miracles. But it is not only that we are in contact with the spirits of the past. The mystery of time in these places is deeper and more abstract. Here we face time itself. The actual history and age of the castle or cave or forest is irrelevant. They are eternally old, eternally present, and eternally in the future, and at the same time they evoke the sense of an impending end of days. They can collapse. In these spaces we exist as if it were in parallel times, in superposed times, in a sense outside of time, but acutely aware of an end of time. The castle of the imagination is not home. It lacks the intimacy of home. We can never control a castle, like we cannot control a forest or a cave. They control us. We are created by them in the shape of their faces. But at the same time, they are the real home. They are the spaces of our origin. Our souls were shaped here. Anything else, towns, villages, houses, are pitiful attempts to escape the ancestral home. The human race was born in forests and caves. In the castle, the forest, and the cave, everything is eternally familiar and at the same time unfamiliar. And for that reason, in this home we live as if we were living in our own unknown soul. In the castle, the forest, and the cave, we exist on the borderline of life and death, and also on the borderline between the object world and the world of the living. Nature penetrates the castle, and the castle itself is nature. In the dark, hidden paths of these spaces, we can never be certain that the thing we notice is an object or a living thing, whether it's a plant, an animal, or a human being, whether alive or dead, whether we imagine it or it is really there. It is almost as if we would descend into a subconscious domain in our mind where these things had not yet been separate. Perhaps something in us remembers that long time ago we were animals, and before that plants, and before that elements, and before that perhaps the gesture of the soul, and before that we did not exist. One walks in the cave, steps on what seems to be a rock, but it is alive. Was this a living creature that we took for an object, or are the objects alive? What I taught so far is the list of the poetic themes that are fundamental to human dreams. And these are exactly the themes explored in The Fall of the House of Usher. Poe's writing is a series of poetic variations on these dream images, each opening up toward more images. I don't have time to give here examples, but I believe that anyone who read the text can recall countless lines that illustrate everything I said point by point. In fact, I did this exercise again on the bus coming to Bar-Ilan, and every single sentence could have several quotes from the short story. The castle forest cave imagery could express psychological conditions resulting from suppressed trauma, but this is secondary. These dream places in Poe's short story have to do with a spiritual reality that is present in every human being. It is part of our communal subconscious. When taken seriously, the castle forest cave imagination is a daring encounter with the existential questions of space and time, life and death, reality and dream. It is the cosmos, the entire cosmos in miniature. It is not an accident that mythologies, as well as folk tales, as well as children's stories, cannot do without forests, deserts, and caves. This brings me to my final point, namely that the castle forest cave image is not, at its root, terrifying. In analysis of the fall of the House of Usher, the idea of terror occurs again and again. But this space is terrifying only because it reaches down to the base of our questions about existence. But exactly because of this, it is ultimately a beautiful space. The complex emotion we feel when we enter the cave of our dream is impossible to analyze in words. Only poetry and music can penetrate it with the reverberation of images, perhaps. In Poe's story, every description is at the same time terrifying, compelling, familiar and unfamiliar, bizarre, magical, mysterious, supernatural, and beautiful. All of this is at the same time, all the time. There is a recurring image in the book. A frightening dark space is illuminated by a mysterious glowing light. Words like beauty, glow, splendor, light, gleam, radiance, flashing, shining, shone appear throughout the text. At the most dramatic moment of the story, we read these lines. And again, I'm quoting these lines in a poetic division. It was a tempestuous yet sternly beautiful night, widely singular in its terror and beauty. We had no glimpse of the moon or star, but the terrestrial objects around us were glowing in unnatural light. I would like to show you now a parallel. There are many parallels to this space, the capturing of that magical space in music. I mean, I can say that maybe half of the music literature is like that. And I would like to show a section by Debussy's Péléas et Mélisande. It is a scene when Péléas et Mélisande has to enter a cave. It's, again, interesting why they have to go to that cave, but I'm a delegate. And they are standing in front of this frightening cave. It's at night, no light, there is a storm. And I will play, the whole scene is not very long, but I will start playing it from the section where suddenly they hear the sea. And Péléas comments, Péléas speaks a lot, he speaks all the time during this scene, and I would like to ask you to listen more to the orchestra actually, because the orchestra expresses what they feel, so we don't always feel what we say, and this is also the case in this scene. So we hear first the stormy sea, and Péléas is saying that the sea doesn't seem to be happy. The scene is very anxious and agitated. But suddenly, and we hear that in the music, it starts with this agitation in the music. Suddenly the light appears, suddenly we see the moon, or they see the moon, and everything is very beautiful. And then in this, just because there is light, just because of this good thing that there is light, they notice that there are living creatures hiding in the cave. But then Pela says, no, they are just sleeping. They are poor people who came to sleep here, and don't wake them up. So even in the text, every second brings a different emotion. You know, from fear, you calm down, then you are again afraid. Then Pela says to Melisande, all right, let's go home. And she says, I would rather go home alone. Now, what's amazing about this scene is that in the music, the agitation is expressed when we hear the sea. But after that moment, once the moon came out, everything is absolutely beautiful in the music. They can talk about fear, about these people sleeping there. The whole music is like a berceuse in French, like a cradle song, chireres. And whatever they say, the music expresses some kind of otherworldly love and magic. And when Melisande, for instance, tells Pélas, I would rather go alone, then an absolutely beautiful love melody comes. It's almost like from Tosca, but Tosca didn't exist at that time. So it's this beautiful love melody comes in the oboe. How do I start? What? That's the sea. Frightening is the sea. And now will come the moon. Now they see the people. But the music is very silent and very... Love melody. I do have another example, but I think we don't have all that much time, so I don't want to listen. What? Louder? It's very hard to speak loud after this music. So I had another example, which is from Bartok's Bluebeard's Castle, but I think we are so much under the influence of this music that it's not a good idea to put something else immediately after. There you can hear the similar thing even more, because it's the most frightening moment when Yehudit hears the scream of the castle, and after that she asks, "What was this? You know, what happened?" And while she's asking that, and while she's wondering, we hear a beautiful pastoral music, which tells that that actually, even though she's afraid, so even though we are afraid at these places, we know that that's our place. That's where we have to be, and that with this doubt and with this terror, if you want. So the fall of the house of Usher opens with a scene in grey and white. This is followed by images which are dark, but at the same time miraculously luminous. The last paragraph of the story depicts a scene in that vast shadows open up to wild light of unusual gleam. And again, I read this last section, the original text, with a poetic diction. The radiance was that of the full setting and blood-red moon, which now shone vividly through that once barely discernible fissure. While I gazed, this fissure rapidly widened. There came a fire's breath of the whirlwind. The entire orb of the satellite burst at once upon my sight. My brain reeled as I saw the mighty walls rushing asunder. There was a long and tumultuous shouting sound, like the voice of 1,000 waters. I don't know, you just cannot write more beautiful poetry. And the voice of 1,000 waters. In this last scene of the story, radiance meets the voice of 1,000 waters. Water is the beginning of all life. Is this end tragic? Or is it perhaps the fantastic dream of the world coming to its order? The beautiful nightmare ending in beautiful apocalypses. Thank you very much.